So many times I get the question, what should a nonprofit treasurer be doing? Or how should the board be engaged in the finances? So I've created a series of videos to talk more about that. Now, I'm not going to cover what the role of a treasurer is. I've done that on another video, and I really want to encourage you to check that out because it can range from a treasurer that does everything related to finances to a situation where there's already just watching everything that's been done. So you will first need to kind of clue into what type of organization you are a part of. But today I'm going to talk about some of the financial tools that you can use. Hi, I'm Teresa Clark, and I'm a seasoned CPA with over 25 years of experience serving 501c3 organizations. I've worked external to the organizations as an auditor, and I've worked inside the nonprofit organizations as a CFO. So I bring a unique perspective to your financial journey. I hope you'll jump on my website and learn more at teresaclark.com. All right. So, one of the best tools that a nonprofit organization's treasurer and board should be using is the financial reports. So, I'm going to break down for you what those are and how they should be used. So, there are two reports that you should have for every board meeting. So, what are we looking at? The first one is a statement of financial position. For profit organizations call this the balance sheet, and it's truly as of a point in time as of a specific date, and it's typically a month end or a quarter end. And this report is going to show you the balances for the things that the nonprofit owns, which are assets, owes, which are liabilities, and then the net assets. More on that in a minute. Okay, so what kinds of things should you be looking for here? Well, one of the things I like to keep an eye on is what are the bank accounts or, kind of cash and investment balances doing? Are they adequate is a good question. And what are their trends? Have they been trending downward so that we are really reducing our bank balances? Is that expected? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but is it expected? Or maybe they're expected to be trending upward and they're static. So you want to be looking at these balances and with a mindfulness of what do I expect and what's actually happening. A prior month, current month, or a prior quarter, current quarter, depending on how your reporting period it is very valuable. So I definitely would say have a comparative column and a difference column so that you're able to use this information even more for the purposes of what we're looking at here. Okay, so here's some other things to be looking at on this statement of financial position. Be looking for other assets and other liabilities that are listed. And are they explainable? Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's the most important thing. Create a culture of openness, a culture of asking the silly question. A lot of people will start with, well, I don't want to ask the dumb question, or this may be a silly question, but no, 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 no. Let's create cultures where we just ask, a culture of openness and communication. And in these two areas of assets and liabilities, there's some weird stuff that can pop up here. And so you should be looking at it and just being open to ask. For example, payroll tax liability really shouldn't be a balance there. So if there is, let's ask why. Let's ask when it was paid. Let's ask some questions. Another example, prepaid assets or prepaid expenses. These are on the asset side of the balance sheet. Typically here we want to be asking what is in there? What's that made up of? And when will it be expensed? Because sometimes something gets plugged on the balance sheet because someone didn't know where to put it as a prepaid expense. And then the time has passed where it's actually the services or the goods have actually been received and this needs to be expensed. So it shouldn't be on this report, it should be on the next one that we'll talk about. Okay, and then one more example would be in looking at this statement of financial position is what are the net asset balances? So this section of the nonprofits report is the difference between the assets, what you own, the liabilities, what you owe, equals net assets, which of course does imply it should be positive. We definitely want positive net asset positions. And the balances in this section are going to show you the strength of the nonprofit and their financial resources They're also going to show you if there are any funds that are earmarked by the board. These are called net assets that are designated for whatever earmark there might be. And then it's also going to show you the funds that have been received that have donor restrictions. So those funds have to be used for the purposes in which they were received. All right, so that's our first report. And again, every single time the board meets, we should have this report. It's non-negotiable. It's not okay to skip. Many times an organization skips it and runs to this next one. Don't do it. Okay, the next one is the statement of activities. And a for-profit organization would refer to this as an income statement or a profit and loss statement. Well, because it shows all of the ins and outs, it's better referred to in a nonprofit as the statement of activities. So it's the ins and outs of the organization. And when I'm looking at this report, here's a couple of questions that I would suggest asking. First is look at the very bottom number, the last number on the report. What's the ending net number for the month? Does it mean that there was more income than expenses, or vice versa? And of course, you want to be thinking mindfully, like, is that expected? But in our next video, we're going to cover how you look at the budget analysis, and that's where really you'll get into the details of this. So here you might want to be looking in this statement of activities for restricted gifts that are received or the expenditure of restricted funds. And I think it's really important to group those things separately. I have a lot of nonprofits who use QuickBooks. And in that case, I really recommend coding those ins and outs as other income and expenses so they show up below the operating income total, which would be the section of your nonprofit report of activities that would be dealing with the operating income and operating expenses. So I like to see that subtotal before we get into restricted ins revenue or outs expenses. And the reason for that is because in restricted funds, you very often do expect timing differences. I mean, think about a capital campaign. So you're launching into a campaign to raise capital to build a building. Well, you're going to begin receiving that income every month after month after month after month before you actually engage in the project and begin spending that money. So we're going to, if you're in the middle of that, you are in a place where you would expect a lot of income. But if you're on the back end, maybe the income coming in has slowed. Now your expenses are up. So if you don't have a subtotal before you get to the section that reports on the ins and outs from restricted funds, it can just be a little confusing to understand what is happening. So definitely recommend here that we have a subtotal of operating income and expense, or we could call it unrestricted income and expense, and then use the bottom section. Or in other software products that are built for nonprofits, it's far superior accounting opportunities, but I thought I'd mention a little bit there about how the QuickBooks setup would be happening. Okay, now we really want to be looking at like our income. So starting with an idea of expectation, what do you expect? And if you don't know, ask. So what makes sense? Like, is this a month where we should, maybe have a nonprofit that does bill for some services under a grant? Well, is that billing, expected every month? Okay, is it there? Or maybe have a nonprofit who does a lot of fundraising. They have a big event one time a year. Well, you might not see a fundraising income in every period. So come in with the mindfulness of what month is it? What do I expect? And then look at the amounts in there to say, do these make sense? You can also look at the trends. If we have a financial analysis that shows, or statement of activity, that has, several years or months presented, you can look at to just say, is the pattern going down, or is it going up, or is it static, or do we have a zero when there should be an amount? These are some really valuable things to look for in your statement of activities in the income side. So let's talk about expenses. Again here, starting with expectation. What do we expect to see? Do we understand the line items? So if you see a line item that says, management expense, well, that's a very broad category. And you see, $10,000 management expense. Let's ask, what's in this account? Can you share with me what was purchased or spent that we've coded to management expense? Be really helpful to get familiar with each of those categories and make sure that those account descriptions really could stand on their own. So maybe these were, management expenses that were for a conference or some training and development for the leadership team. Well, let's put that money in or expense in an account that reflects what's nature, or in this case, let's correct the account name so that it reflects the nature of what's going in there. All right, so this is what we're talking about. Getting those reports, getting them every single time the board is going to meet. Monthly is ideal. Quarterly is sometimes necessary in a smaller nonprofit. So that's where we're starting. Next week, we're going to talk about how to look at the results and to find out, do they line up with what we expected, what we planned to see happen in our nonprofit this month? Join me for that next video. Well, I hope you found this information valuable and insightful. If you're hungry for more resources, subscribe here where you're watching, or check out my free resources on my website, teresaclark.com. I'm here to support you. So if you have questions, need clarification, or if you even want to discuss how my services can help your nonprofit, book a strategic consult with me on my website, teresaclark.com. I'm wishing you incredible success and impact through your nonprofit endeavors.